You're nothing but dead weight. Old man, sign here and stop pretending your life still matters. And those were the words my only son threw at me before he turned his back and walked away. I never believed a child born from my own blood would spit such poison at me. But there I was, holding a pen in a trembling hand, forced to accept that I was no longer a father in his eyes, just a burden to be discarded. My name is Harold. I am 79 years old, and this is the story of how I was betrayed not by strangers, but by the very person I loved more than myself. He was my pride, my reason for surviving the long nights on the road, the aching bones after years of lifting crates, the frozen mornings when I swallowed coffee so bitter it tasted like metal, just to keep moving. Every drop of sweat, every sacrifice. I offered for him. When the nurse told me, "Mr. Harold, your son signed the papers yesterday. This is where you'll stay now." I felt the ground fall beneath me. I looked around at the narrow bed, the pale walls, the faint moans of strangers in the hallway, and realized this was not a visit. This was a sentence. I had been left to vanish, locked away like a problem solved. The betrayal did not break me all at once. It seeped in slowly, like poison. At first, I thought he was overwhelmed, that life had crushed him and he made a mistake. But then I saw the truth. It wasn't weakness. It was choice. He chose greed over love, comfort over duty, erasure over memory. People say the worst pain is loneliness, but they are wrong. The worst pain is looking into the eyes of your child and realizing you are no longer loved. That is the wound that does not heal. What I am about to share is not a story for the faint of heart. It is not sweet, nor gentle. It is a confession carved out of betrayal, shame, and scars. But if you have ever trusted someone so completely that they destroyed you, you will understand, and you will know that even in the deepest betrayal, there is a way to rise again. I was not born in comfort. Winter bit our fingers and cracked our lips. Our town sat by a river in western Pennsylvania, a line of mills and row houses. Smoke rose each day like a second sky. Whistles told us when to wake, when to eat, when to sleep. My mother, June, tied a scarf and walked to the diner before sunrise. My father, Walt, worked swing shifts at the coke plant, his jacket stiff with dust. On paydays, he set 3 coins on the table and said, "These are yours. Hal, save 1, spend 1, give 1. We lived in 2 small rooms above a hardware store. The windows rattled when trucks passed. In winter, the pipes sang. I slept on a fold-out cot under quilts that smelled of starch and coal. Nights ended with my mother counting tips and the radio humming. "Sleep now," she said. "Tomorrow is a good day to be brave." School was a long walk on cracked sidewalks. I wrapped my books with a belt. The teacher marked my hands for talking. I talked because silence felt like hunger. After class, I swept the diner floor. I bussed plates and scraped eggs from iron pans. I learned the economy of scraps. Coffee refills were a kind of mercy. Men with black nails tipped a quarter when they could, and a smile when they could not. On Sundays, we ate stew that began as onions in a dented pot. My mother stretched it with water and hope. She kept an envelope above the stove. Rent on one corner, light on the other. She frowned, then winked. "See, it adds up if we keep our heads." I believed her, because belief warmed the room. My father was gentler on days he worked nights. He took me to the river at dusk. We sat on overturned buckets with lines in brown water. He passed me bread and a hard apple. When a catfish bent the rod, he let me hold it with both hands. "Easy now," he said. "Pull, rest, pull." He cleaned the fish in the sink, scales shining like coins. He smelled of smoke, soap, and metal. One spring the river rose and took our basement. We hauled boxes up the stairs in the dark. My mother cried over a ruined wedding photo. We laid the wet pictures on the floor and watched faces fade. That was when I learned time steals even while you watch. Repair came before pleasure. I patched my shoes with glue from below us. I hammered loose steps. I straightened bent nails and kept them in a jar labeled good enough. Mr. Keene, the owner, let me stock shelves for a discount on overalls. Keep your head down and your word up, he said. People trust a boy who shows up in the rain. By 16 I had calluses and a back that knew weight. Mornings I hauled sacks at the docks where trucks idled like beasts. The foreman shouted numbers and names. He called me Rabbit because I moved fast and kept moving. I liked the name more than the work. Then the plant sirens howled for real. A boiler failed. The air stank of burnt oil. My father came home late, gray under the grime. We lost Earl, he said. 2 lockers down. He did not cry. He washed and went back for the next shift. I looked at the empty place at our table and felt fear take shape. Work could swallow a man whole. After that, my mother spoke more of school. Your back will break if your mind does not carry some of the load, she said. She pressed my homework flat with a rolling pin. I studied by the bathroom light while they slept. I learned sums, verbs, and the map of the states. When my father's lungs worsened, he coughed until his ribs hurt. The doctor said dust and chronic and rest. Rest was a joke. Rent was not. I took extra shifts at the docks and the diner. I told myself it was temporary. We were building a bridge. Each dollar a plank. Each hour a nail. One winter I borrowed a delivery truck after hours to help Mr. Keene. He let me try the wheel in the empty lot. The seat was torn. The dash rattled. The heater lagged. But when the engine growled and the truck rolled, I felt calm. The road did not judge. It asked for focus and gave silence back. The night before my 18th birthday, my parents set a small cake on the table. 3 candles because the store was closing and that was all they had. We ate slowly and laughed at the frosting on my mother's lip. My father slipped a folded paper into my palm. His union card. Expired. It is not useful, he said, but it is a reminder. You belong to something bigger than yourself. I went to bed with the card under my pillow. I slept hard and woke early. Outside, the streetlights buzzed. The river carried slow ice. At the window, I made a quiet oath. I would work. I would save. I would keep my word. I would not step over people. I would not let the ones I loved fear winter the way we had feared it. I thought that was enough to guide a life. I did not know how even a good map can be torn. I did not know how loyalty can open a door you can never close. I only knew my mother's hands, my father's jacket, and the pull of the road, already calling my name. I met her on a late afternoon in Pittsburgh. When the rain painted the streets silver and the neon signs flickered like tired eyes. I was 20 years old, carrying boxes for a warehouse, my back aching, my palms raw. I ducked into a corner store for coffee. Nothing more. She was there behind the counter, counting bills with a pencil between her lips. Her name was Claire. She looked up, caught me staring, and instead of frowning, she smiled. A smile that felt like light through smoke. I went back the next day, though I did not need coffee. I asked for gum, then matches, then nothing at all. She laughed at my excuses. You talk too much, she said, and you smile too little. Her voice was calm, with a lilt that softened the edges of a rough town. I began to time my breaks so I could pass by. Each time I walked out with something small in my pocket, and something larger stirring inside me. Our first walk was along the riverbank, where barges groaned under weight and gulls cried above. She told me her father had been a machinist, her mother a seamstress. She dreamed of studying nursing, though tuition was a mountain. I told her about my nights hauling freight, my parents' endless grind, and the way the road whispered to me like a promise. She listened, really listened, the way few ever did. By the end of that walk, I knew I would not be the same man again. We married 2 years later in a small brick church with peeling paint and wooden pews polished by countless prayers. My mother wept into her handkerchief. My father, stiff in his only suit, shook Claire's hand like she was already his daughter. After the ceremony, we shared a sheet cake from the diner, the same one my mother once scrubbed floors in. It was not lavish, but it was ours. We laughed more that day than I thought possible. Life together was not easy, but it was rich in its own way. We rented a narrow apartment above a tailor's shop. The ceiling leaked in storms. The radiator clanked at midnight. Yet it felt like a castle when Claire cooked stew on Sundays. She hummed while stirring the pot, and I would sit at the small table, boots still dusty from work, watching her move as if she carried music in her bones. I took every job I could find, truck shifts that kept me on the road for days, unloading freight until my knees buckled, guarding warehouses at night with nothing but a flashlight and cold air for company. Every payday, I folded bills into an envelope marked future. It was thin at first, then thicker. Claire touched it sometimes with her fingertips, smiling softly. Each dollar was not just money. It was a brick in the house we swore we would build, a roof over the family we prayed to have, even in exhaustion. She gave me reasons to rise. I remember coming home once, bones screaming from a week-long haul, and finding candles on the table. Claire had cooked chicken with borrowed spices. She had no dress except the one she wore to church. But that night, she looked like the world had crowned her queen. She poured me coffee, held my hand, and whispered, "This is enough. Harold, as long as you come back, this is enough." There were nights when bills piled too high and meals were stretched too thin. She worked part-time at a laundry, folding clothes until her fingers were red. She never complained. When I asked if she was tired, she would say, "Only of missing you." Then she would rest her head on my shoulder, and I felt like the richest man alive. We built small rituals that kept us steady. Sunday walks to the park, even if rain dampened our coats. Letters tucked in my bag when I left for long trips, each signed with the same line, "Come home safe, because you are my home." I read those notes at truck stops, in dinners, in lonely motel rooms, and they steadied me when fatigue threatened to break me. The years passed with struggle, yes, but also with laughter echoing in rooms too small for dreams. We learned that love is not in grand gestures, but in the way she mended my socks with tired eyes, or the way I left coins on the counter so she could buy flowers from the street vendor. We had little, but together it felt like plenty. Looking back now, those years shine brighter than gold. They were the days when nothing was certain but each other. I thought that foundation would last forever, that no storm could reach us. I did not yet know how fragile happiness can be, or how swiftly the world can tilt. But in those early years, with Claire's laughter filling our narrow apartment, I believed in forever. Claire told me on a Tuesday evening, standing in the kitchen doorway with one hand pressed against her belly and the other clutching a thin strip that changed our lives. Her smile wavered like a candle flame. I dropped my lunch pail on the counter, and she whispered, "I think God said yes." My hands shook as I pulled her close. The kitchen smelled of soap and onions, but to me it smelled like promise. I told her I would work harder. I would make sure our child never knew cold or hunger. We began marking weeks on the wall with pencil strokes. Claire borrowed small booklets from the clinic, circling words like rest, protein, and walking when the back aches. I took extra shifts, hauling freight through nights when the road was more shadow than light. Every dollar went into an envelope marked future, tucked under the sugar jar. She would smile at it as if the paper was already bricks and a roof. At the first checkup, the doctor moved a wand across her skin, and the room filled with a racing drumbeat. That sound belonged to someone tiny but already ours. It ended every doubt I had ever carried. From that night forward, I rubbed oil into Claire's tired feet, and she held my wrist, whispering that she was not afraid as long as I stayed. When the day arrived, snow fell in dirty clumps across the streets. Our truck would not start, so we caught a bus, Claire gripping my sleeve with each contraction. I counted breaths with her. In. 2. Out. 2. The nurse urged her to push, and then a sharp cry split the room. They laid a small, red-faced boy on Claire's chest. She laughed and wept at once. I touched his damp hair and felt something burst in my chest, light flooding where there had only been grind. We named him Noah. We carried him home, wrapped in a second-hand blanket. He slept in a basket beside our bed. I learned the music of his cries. The thin one for hunger, the sharp one for pain. I heated bottles in pots of water, walked circles in the dark, and sang the same 4 lines of an old hymn until my throat ached. When he finally slept, I sat awake just to watch his chest rise and fall. That small rhythm felt like church bells. Bills pressed in, heavier than ever. Claire returned part-time to the laundry when Noah was 4 months old. Each afternoon, I carried him to the window so he could see her walk up the block. He pressed both palms to the glass, laughing when she waved. I built him a crib from rough pine boards, sanding until the floor turned white with dust. Claire tucked in a blue sheet, and we strung paper stars from thread. At night, I lay on the rug beside him, telling him about rivers and roads. He gripped my finger as though anchoring me to the world. His first fever nearly broke us. Rain lashed the windows while his tiny body burned in my arms. We carried him to the clinic in our coats, begging for help at 3 a.m. The nurse's gentle hand and a small paper cup steadied us. By dawn, his fever eased, and though my body sagged from exhaustion, I went to work with a heart so light it felt like wings. When he learned to stand, the apartment turned into a stadium. Every step was victory. He clapped for himself, toppled, then tried again. His first word was, "Duh," said with a grin that cured every ache in me. I started a jar labeled college. At first it held only coins, a joke between us. But soon it became a sacred promise. Each tip, each overtime dollar. I slipped inside. Sundays became our ritual. We pushed his stroller to the park by the river, where music drifted from old brass instruments. Noah kicked his feet at the sound. I bought him a cheap ball and glove. We played catch in the grass, but each catch brought laughter that echoed like fireworks. I taught him the small rules of men. Say thank you. Carry your share. Never lie. Claire taught him gentler lessons. Wash your hands. Return your books on time. Write your name clearly because it belongs to you. Together, we carved a fragile code into his days, praying it would hold when the world tested him. Work kept tugging me farther from home. Dispatchers loved my quick yes, and routes grew longer. At truck stops, I fed coins into payphones, timing my calls so he could hear me before bed. Coming home was my salvation. The door would swing open before I even knocked, and Noah came running down the hall in socks. arms wide. We dreamed of a house. We circled listings in the weekly paper. Most too costly. Some too broken. Then Claire pointed to a photo of a small yard with a maple tree. "That one," she said. "It looks like a place where summers can be kind." I told her we would get it. I believed myself. On his 5th birthday, we strung bunting made of paper strips. He blew out candles and refused to share his wish. Later, after the cake was gone, he curled into my lap and fell asleep with his cheek against my chest. I felt the weight of his small body and made a vow as private as prayer. I would carry him farther than my father had carried me. Those years shone brighter than gold. We had little, but together it felt like abundance. We held each other close. We held our word closer. And I believed the road ahead was clear. I did not yet know how fragile happiness is. How swiftly a storm can change the course of a life. It was a gray November morning, when the air felt heavier than usual, and Claire coughed as if her chest had turned to stone. She brushed it off with a smile, said she was only tired from the laundry, but her skin was pale, and her voice cracked when she whispered. I begged her to see a doctor. She finally agreed when even Noah noticed. He touched her arm and asked, "Mom, why are you always cold?" The doctor's office smelled of antiseptic and fear. They ran tests, spoke in low tones, avoided my eyes. At last, a man in a white coat folded his hands and said words that shattered our world. "It's advanced. We'll try what we can. But time is limited." I gripped Claire's hand until my knuckles turned white. She looked at me calmly, as if she already knew. Later, in the bus ride home, she leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Promise me you'll keep him safe, no matter what." I promised, though my throat burned like fire. The weeks became a blur of hospital visits, sleepless nights, and prayers said into the dark. Noah would crawl onto her bed with his school books, reading aloud with a voice that shook. She stroked his hair, smiling, hiding her pain behind lips that quivered when she thought we weren't looking. I kept working every spare hour, but money vanished, like water through cracks. Medicine, bills, rent. I sold my tools, then my watch, and finally, the truck I loved more than myself. I told Noah we were only tightening belts. I told Claire we were fine. But when she slept, I sat in the kitchen, head in my hands, wishing I could trade places. One evening, as snow drifted against the window, Claire called me close. She was weaker now, her voice thin. "Don't carry guilt, Harold. Life owes us nothing. Love is enough." She kissed my hand, her lips already cool, and fell asleep. By morning, she was gone. The silence after her passing was unbearable. Her dresses hung in the closet like ghosts. The crib she once decorated with stars felt like a tomb of memories. Noah clung to me, asking when she would come back. I told him the truth slowly, choking on every word. He wept in my arms, and I felt myself fracture, holding him while the world collapsed around us. At the funeral, neighbors filled the church with flowers and soft hymns. Noah sat stiff in his little suit, clutching my sleeve, staring at the coffin as if refusing to believe. When they lowered her into the ground, he whispered, "Don't let them leave her there." I couldn't answer. My chest burned with a grief so sharp I thought it would kill me. Afterward, the house was too large, every corner echoing her absence. Meals turned tasteless. Nights stretched endlessly. I found myself speaking to her chair, to her pillow, to the air itself, just to remember the sound of her name. Noah tried to be strong, too strong for a boy his age. He washed dishes, folded laundry, even told me not to worry. But at night, When he thought I was asleep, I heard him crying into his blanket. I carried on, but hollow. Work became mechanical. Each day, only a step to the next. I filled notebooks with numbers, schedules, and nothing else. Because writing words about her was too painful. At times, I wondered if God had made a mistake leaving me behind. Yet, when I looked at Noah, I knew why I was still breathing. He needed me, even when I felt I had nothing left. Years later, I still feel the chill of that winter. Claire's laughter had been the music of our lives. And when it ended, the silence nearly drowned us. Losing her was not just losing a wife. It was losing the anchor that held us steady. From then on, it was just me and Noah. Two souls against the world, carrying a grief too heavy for one, too deep for two. Grief does not end with a date on a stone. It moves into your habits and sits there. Years passed. Noah grew taller than me, sharp around the eyes, quick with numbers. He took a job at a brokerage downtown and wore suits that never wrinkled. He came home after dark with stories of markets I did not understand. He smiled and said, "Trust me, Dad." I wanted to. He brought a girl named Sloane to Sunday stew. Red lipstick, fast talk, a laugh that filled the room. She called me Hal on day 2. Fine by me. I wanted the house to sound alive. The first suggestion came soft. "Dad, let me handle your bills. No more lines. No more late fees. You deserve rest." He slid papers across the table. Simple access so I could see everything from a phone. I signed with hands that shook a little. It felt like love to trust him. Soon there were more forms. A notarized letter. Power of attorney. Just for convenience. He said that word often. Convenience. It saves you from headaches. Dad. He put a silver pen in my hand and called me the smartest man he knew. I laughed and signed. Small changes followed. The cable plan changed. The old truck sold. The insurance adjusted. He said we were optimizing. Next, he showed me colored bars on a tablet. If we move funds here and free equity there, your cash flow doubles. You can fish and read. Maybe travel to the coast. Sloane loves the sea. I told him the river was enough. And still I signed again. Mail thinned. He turned off paper statements because digital was cleaner. My mailbox held flyers and coupons. When I asked, he said everything was safe online. I nodded and let it be. Then the roof began to drip in the hallway. I called Noah. He promised to send a man. Days passed. The stains spread. I patched what I could reach. Then called the bank to pull a little cash. The voice on the phone was kind and distant. "Sir, transactions above a limit require your agent. It is in the file. Power of attorney is active." My mouth went dry. I hung up and sat very still. That night, Noah arrived late. Sloane waited in the car with the engine running. "Markets dipped," he said. "I moved some funds to stabilize things. Do not worry." I held the phone bill and asked for a printed statement. "Tomorrow, Dad. Rest." Tomorrow did not come. He said, "Stop stressing." He kissed my head and left. The next day, I put a pot under the leak and walked to the branch in my old union jacket. The teller led me to a small room and a manager with soft eyes. He spoke in careful tones. "Your accounts were consolidated under an investment vehicle. Withdrawals are restricted. Your agent has executed transfers to cover liabilities." He turned the screen toward me. I saw my name everywhere and still felt erased. I walked home in light rain. Leaves stuck to the porch like small warnings. I set a second pot under the drip and waited. When Noah came again, I held out a printed summary the manager had given me. "Tell me this is a mistake." He looked at the wall, then at his watch. "Dad, You raised me to be a man. I am building our future. Money should work, not sit. It is not your money, I said. He set his jaw. With me managing it, it will last. But you need to stop asking. At your age, stress is dangerous. I asked for my access back. That is not how this works. Something in me lurched, like a truck hitting black ice. I stared at his face and saw a stranger wearing my son. Shame rose hot. Shame for signing my own silence. The pressure did not ease. He came with a realtor card and spoke about selling the house. 1 level. No stairs, he said. Near the park. Near good doctors. I walked the hall that night and placed my hand on the nicked doorframe where Noah's height was marked. I touched the stove where Claire once warmed stew. The house creaked like an old friend trying to speak. I told him I would not sell. He smiled and said we had time. Time shrank. Groceries ran low. I opened the jar labeled college out of habit and found only a few coins. I made lists on a yellow pad and watched numbers slide like gravel. I called Noah again. He did not pick up. I left a message. Son, I need you. He arrived 2 days later. He looked handsome and tired. I set the papers on the table between us. Give me my accounts back. He rubbed his temples. Dad, please. You do not understand how markets work. Trust me. Trust is not a market. I said. He stood. Fine, if you want to make this ugly. I cannot help you. He kissed my head like I was a child and walked out. The red tail lights bled across the wet street. The next morning I tried to buy shingles and a can of sealant. My card blinked red at the register. Declined. The clerk lowered her voice and tried again. Declined. A neighbor in line looked away as if privacy could be gifted by staring at the floor. I paid with crumpled bills and left the sealant behind. On the walk home I felt small. Like a boy with holes in his shoes in a long winter. I had not felt that way since my father's cough shook the walls. I sat until the pot overflowed and water slid across the floor. I let it run. I listened to the house leak and knew a new storm had formed. Not in the sky. In my own home. And it had my son's name in the center of it. The night he came for me will never leave my mind. Rain hammered the windows. The roof still dripping into a pot on the floor. Noah's knock was sharp. Hurried. When I opened the door, 2 men in jackets stood behind him. Their eyes slid past me like I was already gone. Dad, Noah said. His voice clipped. You can't stay here anymore. It's not safe. It's not practical. I've arranged a better place. He spoke as if he were doing me a favor. I looked past him to the men carrying folders. They didn't smile. One handed me papers with my name at the top. Lines of legal words I couldn't follow. Noah tapped the page with his finger. Sign here. Dad. It's admission. You'll have care. Meals. Everything you need. No more leaks. No more stairs. And then once to the waist, I stood in the doorway, gripping the frame as if the wood could keep me upright. This is my home, I said. The words rough in my throat. Noah's jaw tightened. Not anymore. And then once to the waist, the men stepped forward. My chest burned with shame as I scribbled my name. My hand trembling. I had fought storms on highways. Carried steel till my back bent. Yet now I was powerless before my own son's cold determination. The drive was short but felt endless. The building loomed gray, with narrow windows, and a smell that hit me before I stepped inside. Bleach, boiled vegetables, and something sour underneath. A nurse in a pale uniform greeted Noah warmly, as if they were old friends. We'll take good care of him, she said, leading me to a room that looked like every other white walls. A thin bed, a single chair, Noah kissed my cheek quickly, already turning away. You'll thank me later, Dad. This is for the best. His words cut deeper than silence. I reached for him, but the door closed, leaving only the echo of footsteps fading down the hall. The days blurred. Meals were served on plastic trays, tasteless and cold. The halls echoed with coughs and muted television sets. Nurses smiled out of duty, not affection. I sat by the window and stared at a patch of lawn where no one walked. I felt erased, tucked away like an old photograph in a drawer. At night, the moans of others seeped through the walls. Some called out names of children who never came. I pressed my pillow to my ears, but their voices sank into me. I realized I had joined their chorus. We were the forgotten, stored neatly so the world could move on without guilt. Letters went unanswered. Phone calls reached voicemail. Noah visited once, brisk and distracted. He asked if I was settling in. When I begged to go home, he sighed. Dad, stop making this harder than it is. You're cared for here. Then he left, his cologne lingering longer than his presence. I felt time stretching, slow and cruel. Each morning I woke to the same walls, the same clock, the same smell of disinfectant. My world had shrunk to a bed and a chair. My dignity had been signed away in a moment of rain and weakness. But what cut deepest was not the food or the loneliness. It was the truth I could no longer deny. My own son had decided I was no longer worth a place in the life I built for him. And that truth sat heavier on my chest than any weight I had ever carried. The first crack in my fog came from a mop bucket and a humming voice. A custodian named Jerome pushed his cart past my door each dawn. He sang old soul tunes to no one. He winked at me and kept moving. One morning he stopped and tapped the resident rights poster on my wall. You can still make calls, he said. You can still get mail. People forget that. His words landed like a match in dry grass. I asked for a phone. The nurse said later. Later stretched across days. I asked again. She sighed and rolled a cart to my bed. 5 minutes. Mr. Harold. I dialed Noah. Voicemail. I dialed again. Voicemail. My hand shook. I set the receiver down and stared at the cord as if it were a leash. Jerome brought me a battered radio from Lost and Found. It sputtered static. Then a weather report. I cleaned the knob with my thumb. At night, a late program carried voices of strangers. A woman spoke about a father left alone after a stroke. Her voice cracked, then steadied. I listened like a man near a fire. I was not alone. I had been placed. The chapel was near the vending machines. A small room, a thin cross. On Tuesdays, a volunteer named Lena sat there with a basket of tea. She was not a nun. She taught math at a public school. She had patient eyes and a way of waiting me out. Tell me what hurts, she said. I told her the roof leaked, and then my life. She did not promise big things. She gave me paper and a pen. Write 3 names you trust, she said. 1 family, 1 friend, 1 stranger. Family was Noah. And I choked on the word. I wrote it anyway. Friend was a name I had not said in years. Ray Mercer. We loaded trucks together. He once pulled me clear when a pallet slid. Stranger was Lena. She nodded and pocketed the note. A resident named Miss Pearl left on Saturdays with her daughter. Her room smelled like baby powder and peppermint. She let me borrow stamps when the gift shop was closed. I wrote to Ray in block letters. Ray, I am alive and not okay. I need a hand. And I know the weight of that sentence. I slid the envelope to Jerome. He tucked it under his cap with a grin. Days slowed. I began to walk the courtyard loop at dawn. My legs remembered work. My lungs fought. Then settled. I nodded to the gardener who trimmed shrubs into neat ovals. He said his name was Omar and handed me spare gloves. Help me pull the deadheads, he said. We worked in quiet. Dirt under my nails made me feel human again. Lena brought a folder one afternoon. She had called legal aid. Power of attorney is not a crown, she said. It can be revoked. You can review every line you signed. She laid a copy of my admission papers on the table. My signature looked smaller than I remembered. Rain had smeared it. Shame. Then anger. Then a thin thread of resolve. We made a plan that fit inside the rules. No grand escape. We would ask for a supervised pass to attend a bank appointment. Jerome coached me on the script. Use calm words. Look them in the eye. Do not apologize for breathing air you still own. Lena practiced with me until I could say the sentences without shaking. On Friday afternoon, the front desk paged me. A visitor for you. Mr. Harold. He says his name is Ray. I stood so fast the chair slid and clicked against the wall. Ray walked in wearing a jacket that had seen rain and years. His beard was white along the chin. His eyes were the same. You old mule, he said, and his voice broke. We sat knee to knee in the lounge, while a TV muttered weather. I told him the short version. He did not interrupt. We are leaving on Tuesday, he said. Tuesday sounded like a bridge in sight. He put his name on the line marked responsible party. He booked a bank appointment and called legal aid again. He wrote the date on my palm like I was a boy before a test. The weekend stretched, but my fear bent around a new post. I did small things. I shaved. I folded my 2 shirts. I polished my boots with a napkin and hand soap. I slept through the night for the first time in months. In the morning, Miss Pearl clasped my hands. You look taller. It was only a half-inch of courage. It felt like a mile. Tuesday came with thin sun. Jerome met me by the elevator. He handed me a cap. For luck, he said. A faded radio logo. Lena stood by the door with a clipboard and a thermos. Ray pulled up in a sedan that idled like an old dog. He opened the passenger door like it was a ritual. The nurse at the desk read the pass aloud. 1 hour, 40 minutes. Return by 2. I nodded and signed. My hands were steady. We walked into light that smelled of exhaust and wet leaves. I breathed until my chest hurt in the good way. In the car, Ray kept his eyes on the road. We did not waste words. I watched the trees and felt the world widen. At a stoplight, he squeezed my shoulder. We will fix what we can. Hal. What we cannot fix, we will name. That matters too. We pulled into the bank lot 10 minutes early. I sat and looked at the glass doors. They reflected sky and a thin man in an old jacket and a borrowed cap. I touched the knob, the way a driver grips a wheel at the start of a long run. Ray said, "Ready." I opened the door and stepped into my life again. The bank smelled like paper and coffee. A young manager led us to a glass room. Ray sat beside me with his cap on his knee. I spoke in short sentences. I asked for copies of every form. I asked to revoke the power of attorney. I asked for my own access back. The manager listened without rushing. He brought pages and a heavy pen. Sign here to revoke. Sign here to restore. New cards will arrive by mail. He printed statements and slid them across the table. My name looked like it belonged to me again. Daylight felt different when we stepped outside. Ray bought 2 coffees from a cart. We drank them on the sidewalk. The pastime was almost up. We drove back without many words. It did not feel like freedom. It felt like a bridge. Jerome met us by the elevator and tapped the folder under my arm. Paper is a kind of spine, he said. I hid the folder in the drawer under my socks. That night I slept without the old dream of locked doors. Starting over did not begin with fireworks. It began with a notebook. Lena brought one with a blue cover and a date on the first page. Write what you remember, she said. Write what you regret. Write the small things. I wrote the sound of Claire's laugh when stew bubbled over. I wrote the weight of Noah's head when he slept on my chest at 5. I wrote the smell of the river in spring. I did not write anger. Not at first. I wrote until my hand cramped. On Thursday, the school near the center held a service club. Lena asked if I would speak for 10 minutes about work and duty. I said yes and then sat up late. The next day, I stood in a room with flags and a squeaky floor. The students were quiet in that good way. I told them how a boy saved coins in a jar labeled college. I told them how a man can lose his way and then find a narrow road back. A pastor asked me to record a 5-minute story for the radio hour. Ray found an old recorder and cleaned it with his shirt. We set it on a table in the common room. I spoke into the red light. My voice shook, then held. I told the day I taught Noah to ride along the river path, how he fell and still asked to try again. I closed with a line for anyone who felt thrown away. You are not trash. You are lumber. You can be used to build again. Letters began to arrive at the front desk. Plain envelopes. Cramped handwriting. One from a woman in Ohio who cared for her father alone. One from a man in Maine who had not spoken to his son in 10 years. They said my voice kept them company while they washed dishes or lay awake. I read them slow. Then read them again. I answered each one. The garden became my other work. Omar saved a small bed by the fence for me. We planted beans and marigolds. We watered at dawn. He taught me to check leaves for pests. He said patience with plants, trains, patience with people. The first time we cut a handful of beans. I asked the cook to steam them plain. I carried a plate to Miss Pearl and a plate to Jerome. We ate in the hall. Heads bent like a prayer. A county worker called about a group for elders harmed by family fraud. She asked if I would share my story. I said yes. The group met in a library room. We sat in a circle. A man with a cane showed a photo of his grandson. A woman with silver hair whispered that her niece had taken her checks. We said our names, and one hard line. I am still here. The bank mailed new cards in brown envelopes. The old accounts were frozen for review. A fraud examiner called and took a patient statement. I answered every question. I asked none. At night, I did sums on scrap paper and made a small plan. I would rent a room when I could. I would keep 2 pairs of pants and 1 coat. I would not buy what could not fit in a box I could carry. Ray came on Sundays with his truck. He took me to the park and walked slow when my hip hurt. We sat on a bench above the river and watched water move around rocks that did not move. He did not give advice. He told 2 short jokes. He said I had a voice that belonged in people's kitchens. He meant comfort. I stored the line like a good nail in a jar. Soon the center asked if I would lead a weekly hour called Stories That Work. I wrote a simple outline on an index card. 10 minutes on labor, 10 on loss, 10 on what lasts, the rest for questions. People came from the block and from other homes. They brought their own lines. One man said, I carried a city on my back for 20 years and no one remembers. I said, I remember now. He cried into his sleeves. I began to feel less like a man stored on a shelf. I began to feel like a citizen again. The halls still smelled like bleach. The food still came on plastic. Night still held the voices of the forgotten. But when I opened my notebook, the room widened. When I spoke into the red light, the walls stepped back. I missed Claire. I missed the way she put a finger on my wrist when she wanted me to listen close. I missed the weight of Noah at 5. Missing did not crush me as before. It pressed me into shape. I became what I did not expect. Not a victim. Not a hero. Just a man with a job again. The job was simple. Tell the truth in small rooms until someone else can breathe. The letter came folded twice, slipped under my door during dinner. My name scrawled in ink I knew as well as my own. Noah. I held it without opening for a long time. My fingers trembled as if the page itself might bite. At last I unfolded it. The words were short. Dad, I need to see you. Please. I'll come Sunday. I did not sleep that night. I walked the hall. I sat by the window until dawn. My chest carried two weights, anger and hope, and both pressed hard. Sunday came with clear sky. The staff wheeled in an extra chair. When Noah walked through the door, I barely knew him. His suit was sharp, but his face was tired. Eyes ringed with shadow. He looked older than his years. He stopped a step short, as if waiting for me to strike. Dad, he said softly. I did not rise. I waited. He sat, clasping his hands until his knuckles whitened. I made mistakes, he began. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I could manage everything better. I see now I was wrong. They had Mandix the friend. I studied him. The boy who once chased balls in the park was gone. A man sat before me, broken in ways money could not hide. My throat tightened. You did not protect me, I said. You erased me. They had Mandix the Great for the NXS. He winced. I know. And I am sorry. He leaned forward. I can fix this. I've spoken with the bank. I want to return what's left. I want to make things right. His helping mane. I shook my head. Money isn't the wound. You cut deeper than that. His helping mane. He bowed his head. For a long moment we sat in silence. The clock ticking loud. Then he whispered, I was afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of not being enough. When Mom died, I felt like everything rested on me. I thought if I controlled it all, I could keep us safe. His helping mane. I clenched my fists. Control is not love. Noah. Control is fear in a suit. I do that. Tears slid down his cheeks. He wiped them quick. Ashamed. I don't expect forgiveness. I only ask for a chance to be near you again. I do that. My heart warred inside me. Part of me wanted to stand. To hold him. To end the long night between us. Another part wanted to spit back every cold day. Every empty call. Every drip from the roof he let rot. I asked the only question that mattered. If you lose everything tomorrow, who are you? He looked at me, lips trembling. Your son, he said, still your son. And to the choirs to Khan and Dealin, something cracked in me. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a door opened an inch. I leaned back, exhausted. If you mean that, you'll have to prove it. Not with words. With days, with work, and to the choirs to Khan and Dealin. He nodded quickly. Desperate. I will. He reached out, stopping short of my hand. I did not close the gap. I let the space sit. He pulled back. Understanding. When he left, I sat alone. Chest. I wanted to believe him. I feared believing him. Trust is not given twice without cost. Yet, as the door shut, I whispered to the empty room. Still, my son. There Ard said, that night, for the first time in years, I dreamed of him as a boy again, running by the river, laughing with arms wide, calling for me to catch up. Healing did not arrive like a parade. It came slow, almost hidden, until I realized it was there. Each week I kept showing up for the hour called Stories That Work. I wrote my notes on a single index card, 10 minutes for labor, 10 for loss, 10 for what lasts, and time for questions. People began to come. A barber who had lost his strength after a stroke. A nurse worn thin by night shifts. A woman whose son blocked her calls. We sat in a circle and spoke truths no one had asked us to speak before. When the words came out, You could see people breathe easier. They were no longer carrying their weight alone. Lena asked me to visit her school again. The gym smelled of polish and chalk. I wore my cleanest shirt and the cap Jerome had given me. I told the students what I had learned. Work with your hands if your head is loud. Work with your head if your back is tired. Never call someone a burden. Never sign what you do not read. A boy raised his hand and asked how to carry a home after a mother dies. I told him, you do not carry it alone. You let others take a corner. The local radio station offered me a weekly slot. Ray drove me every Monday. I sat in a small room with foam on the walls and a blinking light. The host gave me a nod, and I began. I spoke about winter halls on frozen roads, about Claire laughing when stew bubbled over, about the roof that leaked like a warning. I always closed the same way. If you are listening in a quiet kitchen, you are not alone. Letters began to arrive. A woman in Ohio wrote that she cared for her father and feared she was failing. A man in Maine admitted he had not spoken to his son in 20 years. I wrote back to both. Start small. I said, start with a soft line. Start with, I miss you. The county invited me to a meeting about elder fraud. I sat at a long table while officers read numbers and lawyers read laws. When they asked for my story, I read one page. I told them what it feels like to hand your name to your child and watch it become a key. They asked, what helps? I said plain words. A door you can open. A person who knows your name. Noah started showing up on Wednesdays. 10 minutes at first. He brought fruit, then stamps. Then he stayed for stories that work. Sitting at the back. He did not ask for forgiveness. He carried chairs. Fixed a hinge. Fetched water. Jerome raised an eyebrow at me one night and said, looks like a man trying. I kept my heart steady. But inside, something began to move. One night, Noah drove me to the radio station. We rode in silence until he spoke at a stoplight. I listen on Mondays. I used to think love was a plan. Now I think love is a place you show up. I told him. Keep showing up. He nodded once. And then he did. We added a Saturday session called Free Help with Forms. Lena sat with us. Ray brought a thermos. People carried shoeboxes of papers. We sorted through bills. Filled out requests. Made calls. Sometimes the win was a new ID. Sometimes a clear answer. Sometimes just a steady chair. Omar found me a small table by the fence. And we set out books. Take one. Leave one. Bring it back if you can. Kids stopped after school. Noah built a tin roof over it with a cheap drill. He did not talk much while working, but he stayed until the last screw was set. I was asked to speak at a church on Sunday. I read a page about dignity. A person is not a balance or a title. A person is their promises. And the way they hold others when the wind is hard. Afterward, a woman hugged me and cried. I told her to call her father before night came. One day a letter arrived with a small check. It read, "Thank you for your voice." I signed it over to the activity fund. We bought a used speaker and a box of notebooks. At the next Stories That Work, I passed them out. Even men who said they could not write wrote one line. I am still here. Noah kept coming. He stayed through the hour. Then carried the bin of letters to my room. He spoke little. But after one session he said, "I was wrong about you." I asked him, "What are you now?" He answered, "Someone who knows what broken is. Someone who wants to learn, repair." I did not hand him forgiveness, but I gave him work. Copies from the library. Calls to the county office. Sitting with Mr. Dean for an hour. He did each task without complaint. Waiting for the next When the radio host invited us to do a live program with an audience, Noah set up chairs and checked wires. I read a piece about fathers and sons, about two roads and a bridge. At the end, I looked up. Noah stood in the back row, still and quiet. A man who had chosen to stay. The center felt different after that. Not new, but awake. People nodded to each other in the halls. Omar's beans climbed the trellis. Miss Pearl shared peppermints. Jerome tuned the radio at lunch. I walked slower, breathed deeper. My chest felt busy, not heavy. I was not waiting to be rescued anymore. I was doing the work I had left to do. And it turned out to be a lot. It turned out to be enough. On the way back to my room that night, Noah walked a half step behind me. He did not reach for my arm. He did not rush me. He matched my pace. At the door, I said, "See you Wednesday." He answered, "I will be here." For the first time, his promise sounded like a man ready to keep it. The invitation came on cream paper with black letters. A celebration of voices. The library downtown wanted me to read from my notebook for their community night. I set the letter on my dresser and stared at it until Noah walked in. He read it once, then said, "We'll go." He did not ask if I was ready. He said it like fact. On the night of the event, Ray drove us in his truck. Lena met us on the steps, holding a folder of programs. Jerome came too, wearing a clean shirt that smelled of soap and tobacco. Even Omar closed the garden early and walked with us. I had not stood on a stage in 40 years. My hands shook. Noah touched my shoulder. "Steady but light. They came to hear you," he whispered. The room was full. Faces of every age. Some students from Lena's school. Some neighbors from the block. Even 2 nurses from the center. Off shift. Smiling at me from the back row. I opened my notebook. The first page was wrinkled, smudged from nights when I pressed the pen too hard. I began with Claire. I told them about stew boiling over. About her hand on my wrist. About the night she whispered, "Love is enough." I read slowly, each word landing like a nail driven straight. The room was silent. I turned the page and spoke of Noah as a boy, chasing balls by the river, falling and rising again. I told them about loss, about betrayal, about the thin line that keeps a man standing when the world wants him erased. When I closed, I looked up. People were crying openly. One woman covered her mouth with both hands. A man in the front row nodded, eyes wet, as if I had spoken words he had carried but never said. The applause rose soft at first, then strong, a wave that carried me. I felt Claire in that sound. I felt the years in it. I felt alive in a way I had thought gone forever. Afterward, strangers pressed my hand. A young man whispered, "I'll call my father tonight." An old woman said. I thought I was the only one. The librarian handed me a slip of paper. "We'd like to print your words. Others need them." I nodded, throat too tight to speak. Noah stood apart, near the wall. When I reached him, he looked at me, eyes red. "Dad," he said softly, "I don't deserve to be your son." I shook my head. "You are my son. That never changed. You lost your way, but you found the road back, and so it." He broke then, shoulders shaking, and I held him. The applause was still echoing, but in that moment it was just us, father and son, standing on the edge of repair. Weeks later, the library printed a small book with my name on the cover. A thin spine. Simple design. Nothing fancy. But when I held it, my hands trembled. Words I had written in nights of despair now sat bound and real. I passed copies to Ray, to Lena, to Jerome, to Omar, to Miss Pearl. I set one on Claire's grave. pressing it against the cool stone. We did it, I whispered. Life did not turn perfect. My body still ached. The center still smelled of bleach. Nights were still long. But I carried less weight in my chest. Because I knew my story had not been stolen. Because people listened. Because Noah kept showing up. One evening he sat with me on the bench outside. The sky burning orange. He said, "Dad, I can't undo what I did, but I can walk with you now. Every step you'll let me." I looked at him, the man he had become, and I felt both the pain of what was lost and the fragile beauty of what remained. "Then walk," I said. "Walk steady, and live not her reed." And he did. I thought the end of my life would be silence, tucked away and forgotten. But instead, it became a voice carried into kitchens, schools, churches, radios, and hearts I will never see. Pain broke me, but story rebuilt me. I was betrayed, but I was not erased. If you are listening now, in some quiet room, thinking you are finished, hear me. You are not finished. You are still here. And as long as you are here, there is more to build, more to love, more to forgive. That is the truth I leave behind.